You ever play a game and then within like 10 seconds you know that right away it's something you're gonna love? Well, that's how I felt with Ultrakill, a really fun little indie game in development by a dude named Hakita. And from what I've already seen and played, this is going to be one hell of an interesting game. There's not really any kind of story to this thing, at least not yet. The basic gist is that you're just some kind of murderous robot, going through this industrial machine that spews you out of these impossibly long tunnels into levels where you have to fight for your survival. There's a few moments of environmental storytelling, but nothing that ultimately leads anywhere in the current build of the game. You're not going to be reading journals or listening to audio logs every few minutes, let's just put it that way. Running on the Unity engine, it looks like a cross between Quake on the PC, but then it also comes with a bunch of graphical effects to make it look like a PlayStation 1 title, with wobbly textures and screen effects. Can't imagine why you'd want to play the game like this though, but I mean hey, the option's there. Now, in the video title I described the game as Doom Eternal on a budget, and that's really how the whole thing felt to me. This is not just a basic corridor shooter where you move from room to room and circle strafe to avoid taking damage. I mean, you will be doing your fair share of that, don't get me wrong. But a lot like id's upcoming shooter, Ultrakill is a game that necessitates mobility and situational awareness. Like Doom, you kind of move from room to room, but these rooms serve more as arenas. So you enter the area, a bunch of enemies spawn in, then you have to kill them. Kill them all, survive, then go into the next room and repeat the cycle. On the top right of the screen, you've got a combo meter like you're playing Devil May Cry or something, which gets higher and higher the more kills and combos you manage to pull off, which in turn increases your end level score. Finally getting this thing up to the coveted Ultrakill is really satisfying, often coming with the added benefit of making the game lag from all of the particle effects. Now the enemies are basic, but they're still tough and able to kill you pretty quickly. You've got 100 health points, but don't let that make you get comfortable, because even on the game's so-called normal difficulty setting, you can still be killed in like 3 or 4 hits. You've got weaker zombie types that just chase after you and melee attack when within range. Then there's a couple of guys that hang back and shoot fireballs, there's a few that hover in the air like a more mobile cacodemon, then some tougher dudes with flamethrowers. All mixed in with the odd boss fight here and there to really keep you on your toes. The boss fights are awesome too, they're really fast paced and challenging, with enemies telegraphing these super powerful attacks that you've got like a nanosecond to avoid. Until you get the hang of these things, you're probably going to die a fair bit, and even when you do get the hang of things, you'll probably still die anyway. To kind of aid you in this murderous journey, you've got some really helpful movement abilities. So for starters, your base movement speed is pretty fast, so that's handy. But hold down control and you can slide across the ground indefinitely, sending out these little sparks in front of you. Jumping launches you into the air pretty high, and it almost feels like you're kinda jumping on the moon at times because of how long it takes before you land again. This, I think, is a good thing though, because it gives you a much needed breath of air for a couple of seconds, along with letting you line up your next shot and suss out the position of nearby enemies. You've got a dash move, of course bound to the shift key, where you can dash a short distance in pretty much any direction, useful for avoiding attacks, but just for basic movement in general. You just feel a lot quicker being able to zip all over the place at the press of a button. Also, you can wall jump, which is mostly just used for platforming and doesn't really factor all that much into combat. But probably I think one of the best moves is how you can slam into the ground, turning weaker enemies into mush. There's just something so fun about slamming into the ground and turning someone from solid matter into liquid. And again, this is a really handy ability because the only way to get your health back in this game is to drench yourself in the blood of your fallen enemies. Yeah, it's pretty goddamn metal, son. You get covered in blood like your sissy SpaceX at the end of Carry and recover all of your health points. This is also a really interesting risk and reward mechanic because to do this you have to be right up in an enemy's face to, catch all of their gunk at once. So it's a bit of a catch-22 of putting yourself right in harm's way, with the reward being a complete health refill. But it also frees up the level design from having to worry about the balancing of placing health kits all over the place. Same thing with the ammunition, which is also unlimited. This is important to mention because there is a whole lot of killing to be done here, and you never feel bogged down by the burden of having to keep your eye on this ever dwindling ammo supply. Once you finish a room, it'll often just be covered in blood and you'll see body parts all over the place and even the odd eyeball rolling around. It's glorious. Ultrakill doesn't have a whole heap of weapons, in fact it's only got 3 and these aren't exactly going to rock your world, but the way that they work with the combat does make them feel a bit more dynamic. So you've got your fists to begin with, which are useful for only really basic melee attacks against the absolute weakest enemies, but even then, I wouldn't risk it. What the fists are really good for though is hitting projectiles back at enemies. You see, some enemy types fire off these red balls and if you time it absolutely perfect, you can hit it right back in their face. Yeah, fuck them. Thing is though, the window for this is really narrow, and even after like 2 hours of playtime, I still hadn't really mastered it, but it is so satisfying when you pull it off. You can even shoot these projectiles before they launch them, causing it to detonate right in their face, which also looks awesome. Then you've got the main weapons, and these are a pistol, a shotgun, and a nail gun. Stock standard. But it's the fire modes that make them interesting. So for the pistol, it's got this charged up shot that does heaps of splash damage, kind of like a mini BFG. The other fire mode for this thing, you flip out this little coin, and if you can manage to shoot the coin, it ricochets into nearby enemies for massive damage. I can't think of any other shooting game that lets you do that, so points for creativity there alone. And this is an incredibly skill-based mechanic. I mean, try doing this on the go when you've got like a dozen dudes chasing after you. For the shotgun, it's also got a charged up shot mode, but the difference is that holding down the right mouse button only changes the speed and the trajectory that it fires out. Think of the dynamite bundle from Blood, and it's the same kind of concept. The other fire mode loads up a bunch of extra shells at once, up to 4, which you can then fire out in one ultra powerful blast. Don't fire up more than 3 though, or else the weapon backfires and hurts you as well in the process. Finally, you've got the nail gun, which looks more like a minigun than anything else. It can be fired in a more traditional way to begin with, but it's also got this sort of heated up overdrive mode, where the weapon spits out like a bazillion nails at once. This shreds through pretty much everything, and it just looks cool as hell. Now these might not sound all that earth-shattering, but again, like Doom and Doom Eternal, you're able to swap from weapon to weapon and weapon fire modes pretty much instantly. Swapping from the pistol to the shotgun, then out to the nail gun, abusing the alternate fire modes by using another weapon while it's in its cooldown just makes the combat feel very enjoyable. These overwhelming enemy numbers start to make a bit more sense when you realise how generous and compensating the combat is to let the player freely swap between attack styles. And you're gonna need to put all this stuff to good use because Ultrakill can be a super fucking tough game, and it kinda seems to take pleasure in that. One of the first bosses you fight is this weird looking mech dude who's just constantly coming at you with this weird sort of laser thing. And you're ducking, dodging and diving to avoid being killed almost the entire fight. It's this incredibly intense ballet of movement combined with the violent shooting, and once you finally put this guy down, there's a real sense of relief. I do think some of the arenas though could be a bit better designed. Seems like most of the areas you fight in are super tight and confined. I'm not sure if it was a deliberate choice to make the combat seem more intense, but it does make some areas seem very simplistic. Like some of the boss fights are like you're fighting in a broom closet, they're so tiny. Staying alive becomes tricky only because there's so little room to avoid attacks and such a small margin of error as a result. Some rooms are literally just that, rooms, like flat cubes, or maybe there's a ramp or something, but that's about it. The upcoming second episode shows off a bit more verticality with the level design, but again, these environments are still really cramped. So I hope in the upcoming episodes they can expand the levels a bit more and give a man some goddamn fighting room. The dev told me that the plan is to also add in some kind of ledge grapple in the future episodes too, but I'd also like to see a bit more variation on the melee attacks. I mean, because right now there's just no real reason to use it in combat. Ultrakill is a really good example of this next wave of indie shooters that are coming out. Seems like that whole Dusk and Ion Fury era is over. All those shooters that were a throwback to the more simpler titles of the 90s are being replaced by this upcoming wave of super fast, intense, violent shooters, favouring mobility and twitch shooting. Good examples are upcoming games like Get to the Orange Door, Maximum Action, and Trepann 2. Even Ghost Runner from what I've seen too, and yeah, only seen, because 3D Realms are a bunch of wimps and won't send me a playable build. Anyway, my point is these are the kind of games where you're gonna have to have decent reflexes and mechanical aim to do well. And it's gonna make the gameplay feel so much more rewarding when you can finally step up to the plate and make the whole thing your bitch. Likewise with Ultrakill, if you just use the shotgun and, wait for it to reload, then rinse and repeat, well, you're not going to have as much fun. If you're just going to run around with a shotgun the entire time and complain that the shooting is boring or dull, well, then that's on you. Use all of the tools they're giving you. Move around and adapt to your surroundings and it becomes a whole different experience. Like Bruce Lee said, when my opponent expands, I contract. Be like water. Overall, I think Ultrakill is a fascinating looking game. Seems to be ticking most of the boxes when it comes to what you want to see in a shooter. And considering it's being worked on by mostly one guy, it's kinda hard to fault it. Until that demo is released on Steam, you can check the game out on itch.io and download the prologue episode. And if the whole thing's too tough for you, well, I'm sure there's going to be some lovely visual novels on Steam that are more to your liking.